Hello! Welcome to A Witch's Yarn, a mystical book club led by your host, Esther Dawn. In this podcast, we explore our questions about the world of witchcraft and paganism through reading and research. Each episode, we read and discuss a multitude of topics, from deity worship to spellcraft. So grab a cozy beverage, get settled in your favorite chair, pick up your craft of choice, and join me as I tell you a witch's yarn. Hello, welcome to A Witch's Yarn. Thank you so much for joining me on today's first ever episode, where I will introduce myself and the podcast, as well as give you an idea of how exactly the podcast is going to work. So, today we are just discussing me and who I am. My name is Esther Dawn. I am 29 years old. I have been a witch for less than 2 years. I identify as a Christo-pagan, which means that I believe in the Christian deity, God, but he's not the only God that I worship. I also worship Welsh deities. Of course, I couldn't make it easy on myself and worship something more common like the Greek pantheon or the Egyptian pantheon. I only know of 2 authors who write for the Welsh pantheon, and we will read on both of them in this podcast, which I'm super excited about. But I wanted to tell you that a little bit about myself, especially about the being Christo-pagan, to tell you I will be discussing Christian witchcraft in this podcast, but that will not be all that I discuss. I won't even just discuss Christian and Welsh. I'm going to dive into everything because I'm the type of person who wants to know everything about everything. That's why I am going for my second bachelor's degree soon. But yeah, so I'm 29, I am married to my wonderful husband of 4 years, and we have a cat together. Her name is Chai, and she is queen of the castle. Occasionally you might hear her meowing because she just does that. You might also hear my husband just walking around in the background because I have not soundproofed my space. I don't know if I will ever be able to soundproof my space. I record in my craft room / altar room. So I've got basically one side that's like office and yarn and embroidery and bobbin lace and all that fun stuff. And then the other side of my room is altar with a candle for God, Jesus, Asherah, who I worship as the divine feminine, as well as a candle for Ceridwen, who is currently the only Welsh deity that I worship, though I will eventually be expanding that to other Welsh deities such as Bran the Blessed, Gwydion. There's all sorts of really, really cool deities. Eventually we'll read the Mabinogion, which is fantastic and super cool. I want to tell you a little bit about why I became a witch and how. So I'll start right at the very beginning. I grew up Christian. One of my very first memories was when I was like 3 or 4, and I was going to a preschool, like a private preschool that happened to be right across the street from where we lived at the time. And I have this very distinct memory of being 3 or 4 and this woman coming in, because we had guests come in to talk about things all the time. And I don't remember what she said, but I remember it was Jesus related. And my parents were Christian, but we weren't like actively going to church or anything. We didn't start doing that until I was 11. But like I knew that we were Christian in a vague 3-year-old, 4-year-old kind of way. And so she comes and she's telling us about Jesus, and I remember her telling us about hell, which is a terrifying thing to think about when you're 3 or 4 years old, you know, because you're told, oh, if you do bad things, you're going to hell. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I, you know, do this horrible thing and I lie about eating all my vegetables, I'm going to go to hell. And so this woman's telling me, oh, you, or us, it wasn't just me. She was telling us we needed to pray for forgiveness, ask Jesus into our hearts so we wouldn't go to hell. And it was traumatizing. And I remember, like, okay, I'm going to ask Jesus into my heart right now. And that was my first real introduction into Christianity. Now, my parents, they took me to the YMCA because they both worked after I went to preschool. That's my cat, if you can hear her. That's her meowing outside the door. My parents took me to the YMCA because they both worked, and they both worked until 5 o'clock or so they needed a place to watch me after school, and so they took me to the YMCA. And of course, if you know anything about the YMCA is a... I know, Chai, but I can't open the door or your dad will be loud. Oh, poor baby. She'll calm down in a little bit, probably. But, oh gosh, what was I saying? Oh, so they took me to the Y because they needed a place for me to go, and of course the YMCA is a very Christian organization, and so I remember being read devotionals every day after school before we went and played, and so I kind of went to associate Christianity with fun because, you know, you have this devotional, you get a snack, and then you go and you go swimming, or you play in the gym, or you play board games, or you do this other fun thing with your friends. And so I associated Christianity with joy, essentially, which is not a bad thing. Like I said, I'm a Christo-pagan, which means I still believe in God, but there was still that aspect of you have to do good or you're going to hell. Like, they were very clear about the punishment aspect of not being a Christian. And so on top of associating Christianity with joy, I associated not being Christian with all these horrible things like hell and drugs and all this just bad stuff. So I get through school. We every year during the summer, because again, my parents worked, I would go to VBS, or no, not true. I went to the YMCA summer camp, and they would take me to VBS. And if you don't know what VBS is, it stands for Vacation Bible School, and lots of churches do it. Every week, or for 1 week, you would go to this church, and they would have little activities for you to do and talk about Jesus and had songs. And if I'm a Christian witch who is very musical, I have 2 whole degrees in music. So music was very important to me. Christianity was very important to me. I would go and I would do these things. And there was this one church that we went to that I just absolutely fell in love with. And I begged my parents, please, 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 can we go to this church? They accepted. We start going to this church. I remember I was 11. It was Christmas Eve, and my dad took me to their candlelight service. I'm not going to name the church. I'm not going to name what area I'm from. Suffice it to say, it was an evangelical Protestant church. I went. I loved it. We started going there. I got baptized at the age of 12. And my grandma, who lived in a different state at the time, flew down. It was literally the week after I turned 12. And she flew down for my baptism and not my birthday, which is a small thing, but still. She comes down, I get baptized. We become the type of people who are there every single time the church is open. My dad becomes a deacon or an elder. I joined the choir at like 13 or 14. I am by far, by like 30 years, the youngest person in the choir. And I'm a musical person. I love it. Music is how I worship, how I connect with the divinity. So I joined the choir. I'm, having this wonderful time. My dad is starting to see some of the more frustrating aspects of things as an elder. So I'm in a choir for 6 years. I'm in school, in college, for music at age 19. I am a vocal performance major, but my goal is eventually to become a choir director at the time. And there's this huge scandal at the church. The choir director had an affair. He had to leave the church. They needed a new choir director. He called me. He said, "I'm leaving the church. I am recommending you as the new choir director. Good luck." Okay, what am I supposed to do? Cool, that's fine. It wasn't fine. I was 19. I was not prepared to be a choir director, especially with people that watched me grow up, because they knew who I was as a child, and they still saw me as a child. So I go there and I become the choir director. My best friend, who is now a Wiccan, he became my pianist because I cannot play piano to save my life. And for 6 months, things are fine. It's a little awkward because, again, I was not used to, teaching people, especially people that I knew growing up. And so I start 6 months in. The pastor comes to me and he says, "We feel like you need mentorship." And I said, "Okay, great." And they hire a woman who I will call Janine to be my supervisor. It's a small church. There's like 100 people that go to that church. There's no reason for them to have 3 people in the music department of that small of a church. And she had been fired from that church before, but I'm not going to get into that drama. But she comes in, and I'm essentially forced away from my job. Like, I am super Christian. I was still in that love the sin, hate the sinner phase, which now I look back on that and gag. But I wanted to do well. I wanted things to work out. I wanted to be the choir director at this church, at least while I finished college, because that's what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, was be a music director. But I lasted like a year and a half. I made it that far. I was pretty proud of myself for making it that far. But as I got older and I became employed by that church, I saw a lot of politics. And I don't mean red versus blue politics, although looking at their Facebook page now, there's definitely a lot of that, and it's definitely on the red side. Which is, anyway. But there was a lot of, this family has been here for 20 years. We don't want to offend them, so we need to make sure that they're pacified. And this family donates a lot of money to the church, so we need to make sure they're pacified. I have a very distinct memory. This was before I became a choir director, but I have a distinct memory of someone who had been in the church only for a couple of years. And there was a song being played or sung, I don't even remember, and she danced. It was not like some sexy, hypnotic, whatever dance. She was just having a good time. But she essentially became shunned from that church, and her whole family got shunned from that church because she danced during service. This is the kind of church that we're talking about. So, anyway, I started realizing this is not the place of love and acceptance that I grew up thinking it was. I happen to be straight and white and fit the mold of what they were looking for, but that was not. I was going to college, I was meeting people. My best friend, who is now Wiccan, is gay. He just got married in September. I'm very happy for him. But I remember having nightmares of this friend of mine who I knew at the time was gay, going to hell because that had been so pressed down on me. And I just, I start realizing, Christianity is not, at least this version of Christianity is not what I want for myself. So I leave due to the politics, due to those beliefs. I go to a church and I become the choir director there for about 6 months, and only because I needed a job. It was not like a church home the way I wanted it to be. So I go there, I work there for about 6 months. During that time, I meet my now husband, and we go, I graduate. I move. He already lived an hour away from where I lived during my undergrad. Then I moved an hour further away for grad school. I stopped going to church altogether for a while. Then eventually I go back to another church of the same denomination that I grew up in because I just missed that familiarity. Same kind of issues, politics, hatred disguised as love. I graduate grad school and we move. We move to a bigger city in the Midwest, and I love it, kind of. I don't love where we live. I don't love my job, but I find a church that I can really, really connect with, that I absolutely love. It's fantastic. The pastor is super, super open and pro LGBTQ, we fed the homeless every month at a food pantry, very giving to this big community. And I love it. And when I say open, I mean my husband at the time was an atheist, was not sure what he believed in, and he went to the pastor because I joined the church, like I became a member of the church. And my husband, my fiance at the time, was like, I want to be a part of this church, but I don't know if I believe in God. I don't know what I believe in. And the pastor said, that's what the church is for. It's not only for people who believe, it's for people who want to learn. And he offered him resources. He was very accepting, very understanding, and it was such a mind-altering experience just to hear him say, you're still accepted here, because I had never had a pastor who would act like that, ever. I miss that church. I still miss that church. And I thought I was going to be in that church for a long, long time. Until I got in a car accident. And it was a bad car accident. There was a guy who tried to cut off the person in the car in front of me, hit that car in front of me. It ended up in a 4-car collision. And I had slammed my foot on the brake to try to avoid the crash. And of course I didn't avoid the crash, but I did give myself a wonderful broken knee. That was so broken that, according to the doctor, I couldn't walk for 4 months. That's a whole other story. But because of that, we were living in the city. We knew no one. And I could not take care of myself. Like, I couldn't go to the bathroom on my own. My parents had moved to a state that was much further away than when I, was growing up. They moved when I was in undergrad, due to my dad's job. My mom flew down to take care of me for like 3 weeks, but that was not sustainable. Luckily, she was retired at the time. She's still retired. Luckily, by that point, she was retired. She came and she took care of me for like 3 weeks. But eventually, she had to go back. So we had to move. And we ended up moving into my mother-in-law's house. Now, this is not going to turn into a mother-in-law horror story. My mother-in-law is fantastic, and I love her to death. And I say that even knowing that she will never listen to this podcast. She is one of the best people that I know. And I wish you guys could see me in my room right now, because I'm talking wildly with my hands and you guys can't see it, and whatever. But she's a really, really fantastic person. But we ended up having to live with her for like a year, and that was 3 hours away from where we were currently living. And I was devastated because that meant I had to leave the church that I absolutely finally felt like home. And for a while, we didn't go to church at all for like 2 years, something like that. I am still in church now. I started back at a church about 3 years ago as a choir director because, hey, that's what I do now. I'm super grateful that I get to actually do what I wanted to do growing up. But there's still, this will probably give away what denomination church it is. It is not the same denomination I grew up with, but it is a church that recently had a major split, in major part due to the fact that the main church wanted to be more accepting of the gay community, And this offshoot branch did not. And so it was due to the pandemic and all these things, they had been holding it off and holding it off and holding it off. And finally, they started coming to a decision. And the decision was, we're going to stay with the main church, but we still don't want a gay pastor. And I remember the pastor, who was very open. I love the pastor. He even has a tattoo. Crazy, right? But he's super open. He's super... I can tell where he lies politically, even though he never talks about it, and where he lies in terms of treating people like human beings, even though he never talks about it, just because of private conversations that we've had. But I remember he was trying to explain in a very non-confrontational, non-fear-mongering kind of way, hey, this is what this means. And I remember distinctly one person raising their hand and saying, does that mean we're going to rewrite the Bible too? So at that point, I'm like, oh gosh. Now during that, my best friend has gone from being a Christian to a Christopagan to full-on Wiccan. And I love that for him. I think that it is perfect for him. I am not a Wiccan, but he starts explaining these things to me because I was super, super stressed. I have generalized anxiety. It is diagnosed. I take medication for it, but I still have moments where I'm super, super anxious. And I was talking to him about it, and I remember him saying, oh, try such and such, and he was not saying, oh, you should be a Wiccan, you should be a witch. He was just saying, hey, there's this natural remedy that works for me. Try meditation. Try this, try that. No pressure. He's very good about not pressuring people into doing things. But I was like, I'm not sure. I had always been, at this point, I had gone from hellfire and brimstone to, okay, I accept that other gods exist because it says so in the Bible. I just won't worship them. I'm still going to be a Christian because the Bible says witchcraft is wrong. And I still kind of think my best friend is going to hell, even though he's my best friend, and it makes me really sad, and I'm freaking out about it, to I kind of am interested in it. But it's a sin, right? I can't be a witch and a Christian. That's not possible. And that's when I got onto TikTok late. I did not get onto TikTok until like a couple of years after it got popular. And I got on there for knitting videos. That's why I'm called a witch's yarn, because A, we're listening to stories, and B, because I knit and crochet and do all that fun stuff. But I was just super, super convinced that witchcraft was wrong, and I start seeing witchcraft videos, even though I had not done anything witchcraft related. It was like the algorithm knew. Oh, nope, you're thinking about it. Here, let me push more videos. And so I started seeing witchcraft videos. I was like, oh, that's really fun to watch. I think it's super cool. I'm really open to other religions practicing their religion. I should have been a history major because I love exploring other cultures, exploring history, things like that. And I was like, I really want to learn more about this, but only from a scholarly perspective. And then I started seeing Christian witch TikTokers, and I'm like, what in the world is a Christian witch? That is not a thing. That cannot be a thing. The Bible says that's wrong. And then there was one specific creator who I'm hoping her book is the first book that we are going to read, because I think it's just really, really cool. But she starts talking about how it is possible, what exactly these Bible verses mean, why that's not what witchcraft is in the modern day, this, that, and the other. And I was like, that really resonates. That's a little concerning that I find that resonates. And I sat with it for a while, and I talked to my husband about it, and I talked to my friend who's a Wiccan about it, and I'm like, Christian witchcraft is a thing, and I don't understand it. And so I start, of course, this is a whole podcast about reading books, right? I start reading, and there are a few Christian witch authors whose names I cannot recall at the moment because my memory is the size of a goldfish. But I start reading books and I'm like, okay, so these people aren't the first. Witchcraft has been a thing in Christianity for as long as Christianity has been a thing. We just didn't call it witchcraft back then. Okay. And then I start reading and watching TikToks and I'm like, okay, maybe I can try it. And then this author, this is not the book we're going to read first, but this author comes out with a book called Discovering Christian Witchcraft. And I'm like, okay. So I buy the book, I'm reading the book, I'm like, okay, this all really resonates. Oh gosh, I'm a Christian witch. I set up my altar. I'm still strictly Christian, right? And I'm also listening to a podcast called, oh gosh, what is it called? I can't remember. I will tell you guys next episode if I remember what the name of that podcast is. It's run by a creator named Lena the Jesus Witch. She's fantastic. Highly recommend her. But I was like, oh, this is okay. And I can still be a Christian and have divine feminine in my life, which for a while I was like, I feel like that's really important to me. It still is. And so that's when I started worshiping Asherah on top of God as Adonai and Jesus as Emmanuel. I now have this third deity, Asherah. And I'm comfortable with that for a long time. And then kind of my heart starts saying, there's more. There's more, there's more, there's more. And I'm like, okay, what do you mean there's more? There's a whole verse in the Bible about not having other gods before me. And then there's another TikToker, because of course it's a TikToker. I do not let my entire life be influenced by TikTok. I want to make that clear. But these 2 or 3 creators that I've been listening to have been very, very helpful. But her name is Hannah. She goes by Spirituality on TikTok. TEA. She's great. She also has a podcast. You should check that out. But I think it's on Spotify. I'm not sure. Because I listen to it on her Patreon. But she has a podcast. She's great. And she's like, oh, I'm a Christopagan. And I'm like, that's a new term. What does that mean? And it's essentially where you're Christian, your main god is God, Jesus, but you also believe that the other deities are worth worshiping. Like I said, I had already at that point gotten to the belief that other gods exist. They are divinity. They are equally powerful. The book that we're going to read talks about them as being divine. It's told from a strictly Christian witch's perspective, not a Christopagan. So we'll talk about that when we get there. But yeah, this first section that we're going to read talks about specifically how the gods are divinity. They are divine. They are gods. We can't just say, oh, they're, whatever. But I got really excited and I started, okay. And I'm like, my brain, I'm a long time ago. We're talking about 1700s. My dad's side of the family came from Wales. And I'm like, oh, Welsh witchcraft. That seems super interesting. And of course, there's only like 2 people that I know of that are actively creators about Welsh witchcraft. Their names are Mara Starling and Christopher Hughes. Christopher Hughes has the second book that we're going to be reading in this journey. Mara Starling has 2 books as well. We will eventually read hers. But I don't want to just pigeonhole into my pantheons because that won't make much of a podcast, And also because, like I said before, I love exploring different things. So I start getting into this idea, oh, maybe I'm meant to worship the Welsh pantheon. And so I consult my pendulum and my tarot cards and all that fun stuff. And I'm like, talking to God, I'm like, is this okay? Is this what I'm supposed to do? And he's kind of like, I've been trying to tell you for a while. Go for it. And so that's when I started learning about Ceridwen. And I've become really, really close to her. I'm not to the point of working with her. I'm still in the worship phase. And I will tell you that I'm really bad about worship. And, being consistent with it. And that's part of why I'm doing this podcast, is to get myself into the habit of doing witchy things at least once a week, getting through it, that kind of stuff. So that brings me to why I'm here today. I am here today because I want to share witchcraft and witchcraft resources with people. Because sometimes, luckily, in the world that we live in today, witchcraft is considered like a legitimate practice, even though we've got a lot of Christians that are like, oh, you're working with demons. Some witches do. Personally, I do not. Just because it hasn't really felt like me. In fact, the first author that we're going to be reading, Sarah Rose Trussin, she works with Lucifer, which is super, super cool. But still in the context of being a Christian witch. Like, she does not worship Lucifer, but she respects him as divine, gives him offerings, works with him. But so you've got people saying witchcraft is demonic. It's not, unless you want it to be. But we still have so many resources that are at our fingertips, and sometimes it's kind of hard to like work through the usable versus the crap. And so that's kind of why I wanted to do this, is because reading has always been my passion. Research has been my passion. I'm going to be going for a history degree in hopefully the next 6 months or so. I'm super excited. And I just feel like that's something that I can offer to people, is to help them find books worth reading. This podcast is meant to be a book club. I want there to be interaction. I want people to tell me, well, I disagree with you on this, or I caught this thing that you didn't catch, or all that sort of thing. I want to be able to work with and learn from books with you guys, because I want to become a better witch. I want to become a better Christopagan. So I want to learn. And I feel like sometimes we get so stuck in the practice of it, the spells and the cleansing and all these things that are really, really good and really, really important, but we get lost in that instead of the research sometimes. Not everybody. Whereas my thing is, I'm really bad at the practice part and good at the research part. So I want to kind of balance that out and offer my services as a researcher to give people the tools that they need to do that research, to research with me, to learn with me, so we can grow together. I'm not saying that I'm an expert at witchcraft. I've only been doing this for less than 2 years. But I think that's why my perspective is kind of important, because I want, as someone else who might be a beginner out in the audience, I want you guys to say, okay, so she's new too. We can learn together. I'm going to take a break because I need a drink, but I'll be right back. All right, friends, welcome back. I have a Coke Zero with me now, so if you hear me take a drink, that's what it is. And so we've talked about me and what I'm doing here. I want to talk a little bit more about the podcast itself, what it's going to look like, what book we're starting with, how you can recommend books to me, and where you can find me outside of your podcast listening app of choice. So this podcast will hopefully last about an hour each time. What we're going to do is I'm going to take a book of hopefully our choosing. We're going to start with one that I already had in my collection, and we're going to read it. We're going to dissect it. We're going to research and learn from it. We're going to start with a book called Where the Gods Left Off by Sarah Rose Trussin, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we'll choose a book. We'll read a section of it. We're not going to try to read a whole book in a week, because I don't know about you guys, but I have a life. I have 2 jobs and a husband and a cat. So I've got too many things for me to just try to go through a whole, however many pages book. and do proper editing and research and all that fun stuff about it. And actually give you a good quality podcast. So we'll read it in sections. We'll talk about it. I will give my opinions on it, what I thought, what I learned from it. And that's when you guys come in. Because I will have socials. I have socials that I've just set up. They're brand new. I've got one post on one of them, and a few other things on my TikTok. But I don't have much on there yet because I wanted to save them for this podcast. And I want you to interact with me. Tell me what you thought about the book that I'm reading, what you got out of it that maybe I missed, or what you saw that you disagreed with my take on it, and why. As long as we're respectful, this needs to be a respectful place because I want to respect you guys, and hopefully you will feel the urge to be respectful to me as well. But we will read whatever we're reading for that week, and we'll discuss it. And then hopefully you will suggest other books, so I'm not just going to have to go to Google or Goodreads or whatever to try to find good books. I want you guys to recommend things. Just, again, respect. If I don't like the book or I disagree with things that you agree with, I'm going to do it as respectfully as I can. Just, I ask the same of you. And please don't be offended if I say, oh, I didn't like this part, and that's like your favorite part of the book. Because that's the wonderful thing about reading, and the wonderful thing about being a witch is it's very, very personal and very, very varied. Oof, that was a tongue twister. Very, V-E-R-Y, varied, V-A-R-I-E-D. So let me tell you about the first book that we're going to read. It is called Where the Gods Left Off. It's by a Christian witch named Sarah Rostressen. I will put the name of the book and the name of the author in the show notes, as well as hopefully, if I get permission, link to the creator's website so you can purchase directly from her if you don't want to go the Amazon route. It is available on Amazon, but we'll read the book. We're going to read the first 10 interviews. She does 50 interviews with different divinities. So gods, demons, angels, saints. Again, she is a Christian witch, so that's where she's coming from. So she considers saints divinities. You may not. You may not consider certain divinities in the book to be real or not, but this is just her perspective. I am personally of the perspective that gods exist in all pantheons, exist in some form or fashion. I believe that they are gods. I believe they are divine. I just don't necessarily believe that I am meant to worship them. But I do believe that they exist, and I do believe that they are valid and wonderful to learn from and wonderful to explore. As long as I do it, again, I'm going to say this word a lot, respectfully. The first 10 are really interesting because you get to see how she grows in her journey. I'm not going to spoil anything. Suffice it to say that the Apollo interview is a wild ride. But we'll read it, we'll discuss it. I've got some things that I need to research on it. I've already read that section, but there are some things that I don't know what certain things are, or I don't know certain stories. So I want to have a grasp on that so I can explain it in case other people are confused as we're reading. So that's the first book. We'll finish it in 5 podcasts, so 5 weeks. We'll do 10 interviews per week. And then we'll move on to the next book, which is going to be a book by Christopher Hughes, who is a Welsh witch. He is a druid. I don't know if he still is, but at one point at least he was a druid in Anglesey, which is in Wales. And we'll talk about that, and we'll do all sorts of fun things with that too. And then we'll move on from the stuff that I am familiar with and comfortable with and move on to other pantheons, other forms of witchcraft. Because like I said before, I don't want to just keep this into my wheelhouse. Otherwise, it's not going to be relevant to probably 95% of us. But yeah, so that's the first book, Where the Gods Left Off. Where the Gods Left Off. Whew, by Sarah Rostressen. Now, how do you find me? I am on TikTok, Blue Sky, and Twitter. Yes, I'm still on that horrible place. At A Witch's Yarn. That's it. A Witch's Yarn. No apostrophe. WITCHS. Yarn. Like belonging to a witch. A Witch's Yarn. On Twitter and Blue Sky, you will see my photo is the cover art for my podcast, created by a very good friend of mine. And then my TikTok picture is my cat, and I believe some knitting. I haven't looked at it in a little bit. The Twitter and Blue Sky are brand new accounts. There's nothing on them, so don't let that stop you. If you have a question or something, that's what I want, is for you to be able to find me there. But yeah, so find me on TikTok, Twitter, and Blue Sky at A Witch's Yarn. Other than that, I hope you have a very witchy day, and I will see you next week as we read the introduction through Lucifer in Where the Gods Left Off. A Witch's Yarn will be available every Tuesday on your podcast listening app of choice. Thank you so much. Bye.